Hi, my name is Dr. Venus Evans Winters, and in this video, I want to discuss the peer review process. So I will be discussing the peer review process. Again, my name is Dr. V, and I am the creator and founder of Planet Venus and Planet Venus Institute. So let's get started. Let's demystify the peer review process. So I know that for some people, those of us who are in the worlds of research and writing and people who are even outside that world, but they definitely want to get, they want to know more information about the peer review process, or how is it that we get published. So how is it that we get published? So there's this myth out there that somehow we just put our work out there and it get published. For other people, because there is a big movement now for these ebooks or self-publishing, a lot of people don't know that if you want to research and write for impact, more than likely you have to go through that peer review process. But for many scholars of color, for many Black scholars, or people of color in general, it's a scary process, especially for students or new writers. So again, I'm going to talk about demystifying the research and peer review process. So grab your notes and grab a pen and grab a piece of paper so that you can take notes. Okay, so first, what is the purpose of the peer review process? So despite what you may have heard, the purpose of the peer review process is not to haze you. The purpose of the peer review process was not meant to be anything scary, but a lot of people don't know about it, especially people who are the first, the first, anybody, they're the first that they know to get a doctoral degree, or the first in their family to get a doctoral degree, or they don't know people who are part of the publishing world. And so at this time, I do serve on many journals, in particular as a reviewer on the review board, as a managing editor or acquisitions editor too for book publishers. And so I am a part of the peer review process. Okay, so let me tell you now, don't get discouraged about submitting a conference proposal, submitting a research article or journal article, or even a news article, pitching your news article. And also, don't be intimidated if you are interested in submitting a chapter to an edited book or edited volume, or if you also want to have your own book manuscript um, vetted or reviewed. Okay, so the idea of the peer review process, it actually comes out of science. Okay, so usually it means a group of your peers, right? So not necessarily senior scholars like me, but a group of your peers uh, evaluating your work. Don't even think of it as judging your work. They're evaluating your entire process. Okay, they're looking at different things, and that's what I want to talk about here. So again, the purpose of the peer review process is not to haze you nor to judge you as a person. Okay, so the purpose of the peer review process is not to haze you or to judge you, or even the quality of your research paper or your book chapter, conference proposal, or a book manuscript. Now, for the purpose of the peer review process is actually to provide you with feedback from your so-called peers. Okay, I know when we say peers, who are my peers, right? But usually, typically, when we think about peers, we're thinking about people who are right where you're at. So maybe they are people who they may not say be senior scholars or senior writers, but they have some experience with research, or they have experience with writing, or they have some experience with the topic that you are addressing. So the purpose of the peer review process is to look at the soundness of your research questions. And when I say peer, now remember, it's not one person. Usually, typically, it's two or three people who are looking at your paper, okay, your submitted manuscript. Two or three people, and possibly another editor who also signs off to say if they agree or disagree with the review. But, again, to demystify this process, to shed light on the peer review process, just keep in mind, they may be looking at the soundness of your research question or the soundness of your research questions, right? They're also more than likely evaluating the appropriateness of your chosen theoretical framework, or how you're framing your study, or how you're framing your writing, okay? And also, your peer reviewers are more than likely taking a look at what's called your methodology. So how did you collect your data? How are you analyzing this piece of writing, right? Because not every, it's different disciplines. And keep in mind, every discipline may have a different review process, okay? So I'm thinking from a more of a scientific perspective, those of us who actually go out and collect data, or I'm thinking about it from even a qualitative research perspective or textual analysis perspective. But no matter what, people are looking at your procedures. That's what methodology is. So your peer reviewers, the people who are reviewing your manuscript, your research, your proposed presentation, even your dissertation, they're trying to look at your procedures. What is your methodology? And do you discuss it? They may not be judging the actual procedures, but do you describe how you got to where you are at in your conclusions? I'm gonna take a sip of water. Also, your peer reviewers are looking at your interpretations, the soundness of your interpretation. So, in other words, how did you come how did you come to this analysis? How did you come to this conclusion? What is your thought process? Is it coherent, what you're saying, or your interpretations, based off what you presented, based off your research questions, your theoretical framework, or how you're framing the discussion, your set of procedures or methodologies and methods? I'm not going to get too technical in these terms. you know does your interpretations make sense? So again, based off your research question or questions, your theoretical framework, or how you're framing the discussion in your own words, and your methodology, does your interpretations make sense? Period. Does it make sense? Okay. And finally, of course, your peer reviewers are looking at your results. So based off everything addressed here, your research questions, theoretical framework, methodology, your methods, interpretations, and data analysis, does your results make sense? And even if it doesn't make sense, does it sound coherent? Can we understand what you're trying to say? Does your reader understand what you're trying to say? Because remember, they're not in that lab with you. They're not reading the book with you. They're not in that interview with you. They're not looking at a piece of art with you. So whatever your data collection process is, or whatever your research question is, or even your discipline, at the end of the day, remember that reviewer, even though they may be someone who's familiar with your topic, or they may be familiar with your discipline, or even your methodology, remember, they were not in the room with you. They were not in the room with you. So your job is to walk them through, in your paper, in your chapter, in your manuscript, exactly what you did, how you did it, and how did you reach your conclusions. And that's what they're evaluating. That's what they're evaluating. Now, every peer review process, at least the ones that I am familiar with, have some type of rubric. They have a rubric that's given to them by the journal, or the publisher, the book publisher, or even if there's a conference, the conference, whoever's convening the conference. Okay, so there's usually some type of rubric or sets of protocols. Now, if there isn't one, I just told you exactly what they're looking at. They're looking at your research questions, the purpose of the research study to begin with, your theoretical framework, your methodology, and your interpretations or data analysis and conclusions. Now, keep in mind, everybody's not going to do this type of writing. If this is not your type of writing, let's say you do book analysis, or you analyze art, I don't know, but whatever you're doing, keep in mind that, again, that peer reviewer was not there with you. So tell them exactly how you got to where you are with this piece, this paper, right? With this presentation proposal, this book chapter, this article, or this book manuscript. That's it. They're evaluating not you, but what you've written, what you've presented. And they're usually looking at the soundness of it, the coherency. Okay, so with that said, also, this is another aspect that I need to demystify as someone who works with junior scholars, new writers, even veteran scholars, especially people of color and Black folk. We may not be privy to the process, okay? So again, I'm looking at this as someone who supervised dissertations. I'm looking at this as someone who has served on the editorial boards of publishers and journal publishers, and also, of course, as a research and policy scholar and someone who's written extensively in the area of Black feminism and qualitative inquiry, okay, and theory work. So anyway, the peer review process is more than just looking at the quality of your writing. Now, of course, inherently, any reviewer, I don't care if it's your professor or your best friend or someone who's actually the reviewer on the review board, they are going to pay attention to the quality of your writer, but that's the quality of your writing, but that's not all that they are paying attention to. So the other thing that they're looking at is the literature review. Based off your research questions or the purpose of your writing topic, they're also paying attention to that literature review. So first of all, is the literature relevant? Okay, is the literature relevant to the topic? Second, is the literature that you present, is it timely, right? So is it timely? Is it really, really old? And if it is really, really old, why are you citing that particular person? Maybe it's a seminal piece, maybe it's a seminal study in your area, but make sure that it's timely too. So some contemporary alongside the historical references or the seminal pieces. So your peer reviewers will pay attention, and they also want to know, who are you citing and why? Hey, as a Black woman scholar, I can tell you this now. Sometimes we forget, we fail to, or we don't want to cite the sisters, okay? And some of the sisters are guilty of that too, but definitely many of our colleagues and peers are definitely of that. So hashtag cite a sister, okay? Cite a sister. So anywho, so yes, they're looking at, your peer reviewers are looking at your literature review. They're also giving attention or paying attention to the coherency of your arguments. Okay, so just do some of the claims make sense? Does your arguments make sense? What are you trying to persuade us to believe in or buy in or accept or even reject? Okay, but are your arguments that you're making in this paper coherent? Does it make sense? Again, we weren't there. Next, are your research claims legitimate? Okay, legitimate. Now, we're not asking you if you're legitimate. We're not too much concerned with if the topic is legitimate, but we do want to know if the claims are legitimate. So based off everything that you've presented to us, so based off what you presented to us, are the claims legitimate? Okay, so would other people agree with what you're saying based off the evidence provided? The only evidence we have is what's written before us, not what's in your mind, not what your participants said, because we weren't there. But if you tell us exactly what your research participants said, when, where, and how, and contextualize it, we're more likely to believe you. Okay, so I know this is a sticky subject, and maybe I'll do another video about legitimacy and, racist epistemologies or the inherited biases in this legitimation process. Okay, so legitimation process, that's actually probably the phrase, but a good phrase to describe all of this. But for now, we'll keep it at peer review process. Now, next, did you back up your claims with evidence? Okay, so that's another thing. So again, you may know your research process, and you may be very intimate. I hope you are. You may be very intimate with your research questions, the research context, even your research participants, and even the literature. But remember, your reviewer may not be that intimate. They're definitely not. I mean, they weren't there. So they're definitely not as intimate with your research process, your research participants, your research context, and possibly even your literature. So you always back up your claims with evidence. Back up your claims with evidence. That may be something that your research participant said. It may be something you saw in the environment where you're conducting your research. Maybe it was an experience that happened to you. And if that's the case, provide us with some type of evidence that that's what occurred. Okay. And also evidence, if you're citing other people, you just say, for example, for instance, it may be a direct quote, or you may have multiple people saying something similar. Okay, so back up your claims. And if you don't, then that might be reason for being critiqued by your peer reviewer. So that might be reason for critique by your peer reviewer. And sorry for the noise in the background. That is my Yorkie acting like a Yorkie. Lastly, when you receive feedback from your peer reviewers, don't take it personal. Don't take it personal. It's not about you. Again, it's more about the evaluation of the product that you have presented before us. Okay. It's about the product that was presented before us. So don't take it personal. And you remember, you're like the little engine that could, and you just keep tackling it. Whatever they say was missing or too much of, okay, or not there, blah, blah, blah. And I just want you to know. So before we start talking about racism and sexism or disciplinism, I don't know if that's a word, I made that up. But when somebody think that their discipline is better than, or their methodology or approach to a research topic is better, right? So no matter what, I can tell you now, all reviews are subjective. Okay. Now, I'm only saying that because I am of the philosophical stance that research is subjective. The research process itself is biased. Now, everybody is not going to agree with me. In fact, some haters are probably going to come through like, right, and say, well, research is not biased. I disagree. Okay. As a Black woman scholar, I disagree. I believe all research is biased. I think that the human experience is subjective. Therefore, our research will be subjective. And I don't think that the peer review process is somehow exempt from these biases. Okay. I don't believe that. But the purpose of the peer review process is to minimize. The purpose is to minimize the bias in the review process. Okay. So I believe, based off my philosophical stance and my approaches to research, that the research process is supposed to minimize bias. But I also believe that our research questions are biased. How do we come to our research questions? Okay, that's based off our own subjective experience, our own observations about the social world. Okay, I also think that our word choices, our languages, even the jargon of our discipline is biased. I've said some words right now that are subjective. I've said Black, I've said woman, I said as a scholar, I said as a Black woman scholar, I said someone who does qualitative research. All of that is inherently biased. The scientific process is biased. Where I'm from, you never hear someone talking about the scientific process. We just sit on the front porch, we make some observations, and we decide as a community, as a group, if it's valid, right? So the scientific process is based off someone else's philosophy of the world, someone else's cultural experiences. And so, yes, biases is embedded in the research process, the scientific process, and therefore the peer review process. Okay, so think about that, and remember that when you're trying to get your book manuscript accepted for publication, or any of your articles accepted for publication, or presentation topics. Okay, so now with that said, I would suggest, and I don't mean to contradict myself, but now I would suggest participating in the peer review process early. Okay, so learn the peer review process early. And that begins with how you get used to the peer review process, begins with you actually submitting some of your work. And that might be a poem, that might be a class paper, a paper you wrote in class. That might be the proposal, the presentation proposal that you're thinking about submitting to a conference. Maybe even one of your blog posts. You simply let a friend or a family member, your partner, even your professor read it before you submit it, right? So you just start with people you know. I can tell you this now. I can tell you now. And I get really, really frustrated when a student like gives me their paper, or I'm reading a conference presentation paper submitted for review, and it's crappy. It's crappy. And I always say to people who do that to me, even the people who, I'm not going to say that. So anyway, even people who you wouldn't think would do it, they do it and they know how I feel. And I would just say, I'm not your personal editor. I'm not your personal editor. So never let the reviewers be the first people, the reviewers, your professor, your editor, never let them be the first people to lay eyes on your work. Okay? Never let the people who are making the decisions be the first person to lay eyes on your work. So have a friend or one of your colleagues at work or in your classes, let them read your work first, right? After you've read it and edited, of course, let them read it and let them provide feedback. So that's a peer review process. So they are your peers and they're going to review it first. Okay, so that way you get used to people criticizing your work, not you, but maybe how you present your ideas. Okay, also, for those of you who are graduate students, doc students, the dissertation committee is your first exposure to the peer review process, the formal peer review process. So that's why you have your dissertation chair or your dissertation advisor, you have your methodologist, you have your content expert, and you may have other people who are familiar with your topic or interested in your topic. That's why we pass along to them, our dissertation chapters or sections, and then the final dissertation, because again, they're not judging us as individuals. And if you feel like somebody is judging you as an individual, you are already too sensitive for the process to become a researcher or a writer who writes for impact. You're too sensitive for the process because everybody's going to read your work. Okay. Some of y'all have read my books and my articles. You may not necessarily agree with everything that I'm saying in there, but we can't debate, that I'm a bad person for what I wrote, or we can't debate, that, oh my gosh, she's horrible based off her ideas or what she put in writing, right? So nonetheless, your dissertation committee kind of, toughens you up for that process. They're providing you great feedback. They're evaluating, again, your writing, your writer's voice, your authorial voice is what I call it. How you present your ideas, your selected methodologies, your theoretical framework, how you interpret, what you've observed or what you've read, etc. Okay, so that starts the peer review process as well. It gets you comfortable with the peer review process. And next, I strongly suggest this. I suggest this for high school students. I suggest this for college students, definitely graduate students. Go ahead and people who aren't even in education, right, in higher ed. Go ahead and present uh, your writing to a conference proceeding, right? Because that's like, those are peer reviewers who's going to provide you with feedback, and the stakes aren't so high. They're basically just saying, yes, we like what we like this research study, we like this paper topic, or how someone presented these ideas. We think it will be great for this conference. I can learn from them. I can learn from him or her. I can learn more about this. I'm interested in learning more about this topic. So the stakes are low enough that I would say always try to get into a conference proceeding, right? So submit some of your writing to a conference and you'll get free feedback. And again, that shouldn't be the first set of eyes. Now, they're not your editors. They're reviewing to see if the work is relatable to their audience. Another place to, kind of become familiar with the peer review process is by volunteering to review for a conference, right? So don't just submit your stuff, right? Don't just make other people do the work. You also do the work so that you can learn it, so you can see what it's like to sit in that reviewer's seat. And trust you me, it is a labor of love. Okay. I'm gonna say a labor of love. I don't agree with that all the time, because sometimes people really do think that you're their editor, or sometimes you're assigned the wrong paper. You don't know anything about that topic, nor are you interested in learning anything about that topic. I've gotten some crazy topics before, and I'm like, I don't know anything about robotics, right? I might know research and research methodology, but I'm not sure about, how we should be researching robotics, doing, I don't know, in, I don't know, New Zealand somewhere, right? It's always just like out of my purview. And as a reviewer, of course, you can reject those types of papers from your editor and say, this is not in my wheelhouse. Please assign me another paper. Okay, but anyhow, you'll learn what it's like to be a reviewer. You'll also get practice in using the rubric that the peer reviewers use. You'll also learn the process of what you should be looking for in someone else's, scientific write-ups or write-ups in general. And also you'll get used to providing positive feedback and critique to help shape somebody else's writing and ideas, like how they present their writings, right? So not just their writing, looking for grammar and syntax and sentence structure, but the coherency, the flow, and also if the ideas make sense from the scientific perspective or the research perspective or your disciplinary perspective. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And then also lastly, of course, don't only stop at volunteering to review for a conference. Like, actually become a reviewer yourself. So actually, volunteer to, or I guess you can get paid in some cases too, but become a reviewer for a journal in your field, or become a reviewer for a book publisher. And I can tell you this now, as a series editor and as someone who sits on a review board of a major research organization, a journal, and also as someone who has worked in a variety of roles as an editor, associate, managing editor, on the board of a journal. I can say we're always looking for peer reviewers. We're always looking for peer reviewers. So volunteer to be a peer reviewer. List what your interests are, is it your research interests are, your topics, the methodologies you're interested in, etc. And volunteer to be a reviewer. So again, you can see what it's like to be on the other side of that scientific relationship, that review relationship. And then you'll know too what to look out for when it's time for you to write and to present your work. Also, I would suggest, as far as as I try to demystify the peer review process, is take the feedback given by your reviewers with a grain of salt. Take the feedback with a grain of salt. So if we're going to say don't take it personal, also take it with a grain of salt. And what I mean by that is that you have choices. So after your paper is reviewed, after your book manuscript is reviewed, you have some options. Okay, so you can revise your paper based off the feedback, revise your manuscript based off the feedback, and then you can resubmit it. You can resubmit it to the publisher or to the editor. Also, you have the option of, if you choose not to revise it and resubmit it to the same organization, publisher, or journal, then you can also submit it somewhere else. You can submit it somewhere else. You can take the feedback with a grain of salt and say, you know what? I disagree. I don't appreciate this feedback. I'm going to send it somewhere else. Or you can say, you know what? It's not a good fit. They're right. You can say they're correct. It's not ready yet for this particular journal. I'll submit it somewhere else. Or you can sit it back on your desk sometimes after you shame face. You can sit it here and go back to it later. Okay, just go back to it later. Also, another option is you can accept their feedback. And you can say, okay, I accept it. That's okay. I understand where they're coming from based off where they're sitting. Okay. And then what I would suggest is that you track all your changes. So you can use the track change feature in your computer software, Microsoft Word or Google Docs, and just track all your changes. And then or you can just make a bulleted list like 1 through 10 or something like that, and you tell your, and then you resubmit it. And what you're doing is you're tracking the changes that you made based off the uh, reviewers and editors feedback, and then you send it back to them with those changes, and you just let them know, this is what I changed, this is what I changed. Or you can also say, I disagreed with this, so I didn't touch this. In fact, if you look at bullet number 4 here on this PowerPoint, you will see that you can also decide what you will change and won't change. So most people don't know that. So when a reviewer gives you feedback or an editor gives you feedback, you don't necessarily have to change everything. These are suggested changes. Okay, so these are suggested changes. So you can decide, I disagree with that editorial comment or that feedback that was given. So I'm not going to change this item, but I'll change this item. Or I'll add this, but I'm not taking away this. Okay, so that's actually your choice. It's all suggested feedback and edits and comments. So it should be, you're in conversation with your reviewers. You're in conversation with your reviewers. And keep in mind, you do have time to make these changes. You have time to make these changes. And speaking of that, I know right now that we're in uh, a time where everything is fast. People are getting their degrees overnight. Okay, that was my bias. Okay, but everything is being done quick, fast, in a hurry. You know, people, we can throw up blogs. I'm a blogger. You know, we can throw up a blog and be done with the writing process. Nobody's looking at it. Nobody's critiquing it. We can also microblog, or we can go on Twitter and Facebook. It's a community of our families and friends and people who already like us. So it's like this herding of like-minded people. We can say something, nobody provides us with feedback. You know, they just think you're the smartest person in the world. Oh my God, he's so political, he always has something smart to say. The peer review process is different, right? It's a process, and I'm here to tell you, research is a process. Writing up your research is a process. And even if you're not doing research, because sometimes I don't do research, sometimes I do introspections and observations, or I want to analyze something, which some people call research. But some of you might be writing poetry, some of you might be writing scripted writing, you know, but you may have to still present to somebody else. But writing is a process. It wasn't meant to be done overnight. It wasn't meant to be done in 140 characters or 240 characters. It's a process, and that takes time. That takes time. It wasn't meant to be done overnight. And again, I know everything is done so quickly now. It's like the McDonaldization of researching and writing and getting degrees. Okay, and that's my thing. Let me get off my soapbox. Let me get off my soapbox. So writing is a process. The peer review process is a process. So it takes time. That once your writing is up to par, once your writing is up to par, you then send your writing out to someone else. And then that person, it's a set of things that's going on inside of that journal or publisher, right? So they now have to look at it and say, okay, this title, this topic, this discipline, okay, it is relevant to what we're doing over here. Okay, then they have to now vet and find reviewers for your paper or your manuscript. Okay, and then once they vet those people and those people accept or say, I can't do it right now, bruh, you know, I got a lot on my plate, or I'm not familiar with this topic, or I'm not comfortable with this particular area, then they can accept or reject that opportunity to review. Okay, but then after, so once we have all of our reviewers, now it takes time for them to read your paper, it takes time for them to evaluate it, and it takes time for them to provide feedback. Then they send it back to the editor is going through the same thing. They want to make sure that your peer reviewers, now remember, you have 2 or more, usually 3 at this point, 3 or more reviewers, hopefully 2, you know, at least 3, but I don't know if it gets like 5 or 6. It's usually not, it's not that many that I know of. But then the editor is saying, okay, these people, they were fair to the author. They're also making sure that all names and everything were removed, because remember, peer review is a blind process. That's what, so they're not judging you, they're evaluating the research write up. Does this make sense? Okay. Is this coherent? But also so they now have a process. So maybe that's going to take a few more days, maybe a couple of weeks. Okay. Then they send it back to you after they've removed identifying information and they've agreed with most of the comments, even if they've not just always agree, but even respect the comments and feedback that's given. Then it's sent back to you. Then after you've received feedback, now, if you're lucky, then maybe you're excellent, writer, and nobody has any feedback for you. That's always scary, by the way. You're like, did y'all read it? Okay. Because usually nothing is perfect the first time around. Maybe you even need to change your title, or maybe your questions should be raised more than once in the paper. I don't know. Maybe you're missing a citation, but sometimes, when I don't get no feedback, I'm actually offended. Like, oh, that's weird. But other times you get substantial feedback. Okay. So no, but the feedback has come back to you. Now you're going to sit with it again, and you're going to ponder what feedback was given, what you're going to accept, not accept. You need to decide if you're going to revise and resubmit, or if you're going to send your manuscript somewhere else, or if you're going to decide that, what, I do want to work more on making this a better presentation of my work. Okay. But either way, that's the process. And then guess what? So even when you get it all right and you're excited and you got all your changes and you send it back to the publisher, it's still going to take some more time, because now maybe the same reviewers, or maybe even a new set of reviewers, but definitely the editor will take another look at it and say, we accept this paper, we accept it as it is. Now let's publish it. And so that's going to take some more time, right? And it's not saying that it's going to drag out for 6 months to a year, but it can take up to a few weeks to even get it published, depending on when the publication cycle is, or dates. Okay. So remember, writing itself, the peer review process, and publishing is a process. It's a process. So keep in mind, you're participating in a process. So no matter how we feel about it, maybe I'll talk about some of the politics around research, writing, and the peer review process and publishing later. But for now, let's leave it at that. Writing, the peer review process, and publishing are a process.